Is the Ukraine crisis a tipping point in world history? That's an idea that I'm sure sounds absolutely crazy at first. To most, Ukraine is just a small conflict thousands of miles from home. But will it lead to Daniel's four beasts arising on the world stage? If so, then this is a major end-time event, something that should shape our understanding of world politics from this point forward. The reason we think it might be the point where the beasts come forward is, have you noticed how this event has galvanized the world's nations into various camps? The Washington Post, for instance, called this a turning point in world history, with all Western democratic nations working together in unison. Interestingly, the world's dictatorships also seem to be aligning. Are we about to see a coalition of nations into the four beasts or four kingdoms of Daniel 7? Understanding that requires knowing who these four beasts are, however, and that is what we're going to try and understand in this video. In fact, we're going to identify the nations in each beast and the timing of when the four beasts arise, so just keep watching. But in order to know that, we first have to know whether the four beasts are modern or historic. Are they something that are arising in our current world, as we think in this channel, or are they something from the past that you hear on a lot of other prophecy channels? So let's examine the reasons that the four beasts have to be modern and not historical. Reasons that they are ready to arise now as opposed to back in ancient history. And that makes all the difference in the world, because if you think they've already arisen, you aren't going to watch for them. You see, the predominant worldview of most 18th and 19th century scholars was that the four beasts of Daniel 7 were the exact same as the four metals of Nebuchadnezzar's statue in Daniel 2, Babylon, Medo-Persia, and Greece, and the legs of iron that they assumed to be Rome. And you've probably seen hundreds of graphics just like that on YouTube and on Facebook. And because of these scholars, a lot of people in today's world are still thinking the beasts are historic. And because of that, they're not watching, as we said, for what is happening now. That what we are seeing could be the unfolding of prophecy. But there are solid biblical reasons that the beasts are future, and those 18th century scholars were mistaken. In fact, this older 18th century idea that the beasts are Babylon, Persia, and Greece is actually a form of preterism. Modern scholars don't realize this, but it is. Now, let's look at those reasons that the beasts aren't exactly the same as those historic empires. First, in Daniel 7:11 through 12, we read, "The beast was slain, and its body destroyed and given to the burning fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but an extension of life was granted to them for an appointed period of time." So the first three beasts, the lion, bear, and leopard, exist beyond the destruction of the fourth beast, which almost everyone believes is the Antichrist Empire. This is the opposite of Nebuchadnezzar's statue, where all the metals are destroyed at the same time. It is also impossible for Babylon, Persia, and Greece, who were defeated thousands of years ago, to exist beyond the timing of the Antichrist Empire. This passage in Daniel 7:11 through 12 alone proves the beast are end time, but there are many more proofs. Second, in Daniel 7:17, we read, "These great beasts, which are four in number, are four kings who will arise from the earth." Since Daniel received this vision during the reign of Belteshazzar, the final king of Babylon, Babylon had already arisen. Its king had already arisen. There was no way the first beast could arise in the future, as the verse says, if Babylon was the lion. It requires the lion to be a future kingdom, future to ancient Babylon at least. Again, showing these to be end-time manifestations. Third, the fourth beast, although it has both iron and bronze parts, teeth and claws, it arises with 10 horns already in place, something that will be found only on the end-time beast, not something that existed in the past. The 10 horns or kings have still not formed, so the fourth beast still has not arisen. Revelation 17 verse 12 says, "And the 10 horns you saw are 10 kings, who have not yet received royal power, but they are to receive authority as kings for 1 hour, together with the beast. Fourth, we are told in Daniel 7:7, it, the fourth beast, was different from all the beasts that were before it. This word before has a unique meaning in the Old Testament. When English speakers see the word before, they usually think it means earlier in time, as in, I went to the store before I went home. So when they read Daniel 7:7, to them it means the first 3 beasts were earlier in time than the fourth, the end time beast. If this is correct, it might imply that the first 3 beasts could have been historic. But before does not mean earlier in time in this usage in Daniel 7, but rather it means in the presence of someone or something, as in, I appeared before the king in his court. This correct meaning tells us the 4 beasts are all contemporaneous of each other. They exist in each other's presence. The Hebrew word kodam is the word meaning in the presence of and is found 34 times in Daniel. And it is translated like this: standing before him, presented before him, was brought before him, etc. It means in the presence of. And if the first 3 beasts are in the presence of the end time beast with 10 horns, well, then they're end time as well. Fifth, this meaning is confirmed in the New Testament when we see these 4 beasts again in Revelation 13. And the beast which I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. So the 4th beast in Revelation is made up of parts of the other 3 beasts. Now we're going to discuss what those parts may be later in the next video, part 2 of this video. And you're going to find that very, very, very interesting. Make sure you watch that as well. But for our purposes now, if the end time beast of Revelation 13 is consisting of parts of the other 3 beasts, well, they have to be end time confederations or empires too. The end time beast can't be made up of the feet of an empire that no longer exists. I think from these 5 proofs we can see with certainty that the 4 beasts of Daniel 7 are all end time, not historic kingdoms. That means we should be watching for the development of these beasts right now, and I think we're seeing them arise. Now, what are these beasts? Empires? Confederations of nations, or what? Well, surprisingly, they may also be demonic spirits that come out of the abyss. If you look at the beginning of Daniel 7, you read this: the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea, and the 4 great beasts were coming up from the sea, different from one another. This is confirmed by Revelation 13, which tells us the final beast, the Antichrist Empire, comes out of the sea. And by Revelation 17:8, that tells us it comes out of the abyss, which is a holding area for demons. Empires can't come out of the abyss, only demons can. So all 4 beasts then are likely to be demonic, fallen angels who come out of the abyss and who influence or control nations or kingdoms. Daniel implies this in the following statement: these great beasts, which are 4 in number, are 4 kings who arise from the earth. So if this is happening now, demons, demonic kings, may be arising or have already arisen. This might explain a little bit about what we've seen in the past 2 years, huh? It could easily be demonic type activity. We also know the 4 beasts are symbolic of groups of nations because we're told so directly. Thus he said the 4th beast will be a 4th kingdom on the earth, which will be different from all other kingdoms. This is reinforced in Revelation 13:2. The beast empire is made up of portions of the other beast. And since those portions of the first 3 beasts make up the 4th beast, it's likely they're confederations or empires of some sort that can be broken up into pieces. You can't break a demonic being into pieces. So the beasts then have to be both confederations or kingdoms of modern nations, and they must be controlled by demonic fallen angels or kings. And there are 4 of them. But before we start to identify these beasts, we need to give a shout out to a number of advisors who did an incredible research in helping us put this video together. Our advisory board of Britt Ashley, Michael Tarrant and Fisherman, and additionally Michael Brown and Jason Lawrence. Jason, by the way, assembled the beautiful maps that you're going to see later in part 2 when we identify the specific nations that we believe are found in each of the beasts. Again, remember, look for that video coming out tomorrow. Now, fortunately, the Bible tells us when these beasts arise and how they arise. In Daniel 7:2-3, we read, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea, and 4 great beasts came up out of the sea, different from one another. So they're coming up at the same time, out of the same circumstance, the stirring of the sea, but rising up sequentially. A first beast, then a second, then a third, then a fourth, but at basically the same time, the same event. So what are these 4 winds of heaven? You're going to find this very interesting. The Hebrew word translated wind is ruach, which many of you already know means spirit. The ruach HaKodesh is the Holy Spirit, for instance. So these are more than just 4 winds. They are heavenly spirits, spiritual beings created by God and doing His will. The fact that they are associated with the 4 winds or 4 compass points, however, also tells us that this is likely an international or a global stirring, something that's happening all over, north, south, east, and west. In Zechariah 6, these 4 spirits are identified for us. And listen really closely, because this is very important. There were before me 4 chariots coming out from between 2 mountains, mountains of bronze. The first chariot had red horses, the second black, the third white, and the fourth dappled, all of them powerful. I asked the angel who was speaking to me, what are these, my Lord? The angel answered me, these are the 4 winds or spirits of heaven, going out from standing in the presence of the Lord to the whole world. So the 4 winds of heaven are the 4 colored horses of Revelation. So when Daniel says the 4 winds of heaven stir up the sea, it's the 4 colored horses of Revelation 6 doing the stirring. Daniel's 4 beasts arise immediately upon the stirring of the abyss by the 4 horsemen of Revelation. This is pretty incredible understanding and a very important timing verse. In addition to the sea being the abyss from which the 4 demonic angels arise, it's also symbolic of the Gentile nations. So the 4 horses stir up the Gentile nations as well. Now, Jesus described what would be occurring at this time when the 4 colored horses come out, and he called it the beginning of the birth pangs. Here is how our Lord described it. And you can definitely see that this would be a stirring. And Jesus answered and said to them, take heed that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you're not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places. So Jesus tells us this period of stirring by the 4 horses will be marked by a number of things, all happening at the same time. The coming of false messiahs, wars between nations, and wars between kingdoms. Kingdoms which may be the 4 beasts, by the way. Famines, pestilences, and earthquakes. And that last word, earthquakes, in the Greek is known as seismos. That's the Greek word. Jesus said this period of time will feature the coming of false messiahs who claim to be Jesus himself. And we haven't seen that just yet. It will also feature wars among nations, and also wars among kingdoms or confederations of nations. We are just at the beginning of that period. Ukraine and Russia are 2 nations fighting each other, but the crisis may expand way beyond that. The period will also feature famines. And at the third seal, we learned that hyperinflation may be driving that famine. This certainly seems likely given what's happening in the economy right now. It will feature pestilence, which we just had during the pandemic, and potentially we may have a lot more. The biolabs in Ukraine may release their bioweapons, and we may see a seismos or two. In this previous video, we explained that the Greek word seismos means great shaking and doesn't necessarily mean earthquake as you always hear in the media. It could also be a nuclear explosion, which is very possible in the current situation and certainly would be a great shaking. So given these world conditions, it is very possible, even likely, that the world will coalesce into 4 beastly empires that will war against each other and lead to nuclear explosions, the release of bioweapons, and famine and hyperinflation. However, when this takes place, listen to what Jesus tells us not to do. He tells us to not be terrified, because this is not the end. But it will be the point where the nations form into beasts. Now click right here to keep watching and discover what nations will align into each of the beasts and how Ukraine is a key tipping point in the end times. If the link isn't there, it will come out tomorrow. And I will see you there in part 2.